You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 142 of Making Tracks, brought to you by those pork fanciers over at FanthaTracks.com. My name's Mark, I'm one of your co-hosts, and joining me this week is a man whose first toy he ever was given was a Slinky, and therefore, if he was a Teletubby, he would be known as Slinky Winky. It's Mr. Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Wow, these secrets keep coming out week on week. I'm very well, mate. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well, thanks, dude. I'm very well. I just can't believe it. We're over the hump of a year. We're now kind of like rolling very quickly into July, and I'm just like, where has the year gone?
It feels like it should be Easter next week, not July next week. It's time travel. It's a real thing.
How's your week in Star Wars been?
Busy. I like busy, so I'm happy. How about you?
I have not been too busy this week. I was at a joint Mandalorian and Rebel Legion kind of armor party / barbecue down in near Reading. Good friend of both clubs, John Goldsmith, he hosted that. Yeah, not a huge amount of work done on the armor and the other props and stuff. The intention and the thought was there anyway. So have you had anything in your collection this week? Any new acquisitions?
Not a huge amount. In fact, I've been up and down into the top room a lot, moving things around. So I need to get up there and start tidying up again and getting it organised. But the thing that came through this week, which I'm really, really, really excited about, and I've started reading it, is Shadow of the Sith. I'm about a third of the way through. It's really good. I can't wait to get the review on the site. I'm listening to the audiobook as well. Bit of audiobook, bit on my phone, bit of the physical book. I'm getting through it. But yeah, it's really, really good. I love his writing style. He's folding in loads of bits from the comics and just from other elements and stuff we know from Rise of Skywalker, working your way back to explain a lot of stuff, because that was probably the major criticism of Rise of Skywalker, that a lot of stuff kind of came out of left field and wasn't overly explained without giving anything away. There's been two big things in the first sort of 60 pages that really very neatly explain stuff that's in Rise of Skywalker that if I'd known that when or before I saw the film, I'd have gone, well, that makes all the sense. There's little bits like that are really cool. How about you? Any stuck them to you?
Nothing. Well, I say nothing. That's a lie. I had a nice kind of selection of comics come this week from the lovely Lisa at Darkstar Comics in Cove. She sent me a load through, so I've kind of actually had something to kind of read at the moment in the garden, which has been great fun. I had quite a big chunk of comics to get through, and I'm now caught up. I'm very proud of it. Got to a point where I was just like, this is crazy. There's just so many comics that I haven't read, but actually I've caught up about.
I'm looking at my pile right now. It's still there. I mentioned it last week and it's still there, so I'm determined to get some read. I totally hear you, man. I totally hear you.
Coming back onto Shadows of the Sith, what we've kind of really started to see from the live action storytelling, I kind of think it's quite clever in what they did do in Rise of Skywalker. You know how like A New Hope was very vague, and then it kind of opened up all this kind of new storytelling, because we've looked at it from a certain point of view whereby Rise of Skywalker is the end of a Skywalker saga, so everything needs to be nice and neatly kind of tied up in a nice little bow. But actually, I think what they've done, they've kind of gone back and they looked at Rise of Skywalker and they've clearly kind of gone, well, you know, there are all these loose ends. How can we take these elements and make it so that we feed it in? So then in, like I said, 5, maybe 10 years time, you do look at Rise of Skywalker and then everything does make sense and it all connects. So it's kind of a weird about-face way of creating storytelling opportunities, but yet I kind of think it's working.
There's a really interesting interview this week with Natalie Portman when she's obviously talking about Thor, Love and Thunder, but in there she mentions how films from her past like Phantom Menace and The Professional Leon were films that weren't as well regarded in their day. Phantom certainly wasn't, but Phantom has grown in the eyes of the public as the target audience are now in their 30s, which is crazy, and are probably parents themselves. It's been reappraised in a very positive way. Obviously, Obi-Wan's helped, but also above and beyond that, we've had 20 plus years of ancillary storytelling, other books, other comics, the Clone Wars and other things that make you look at the prequel trilogy with fresh eyes. And as soon as you've assimilated that information, you kind of forget where you learnt it. Even having only read the first 60 pages, and I'm hoping that by midweek I'll have finished it, because it really is one of those books you chew through in a very positive way. I'll probably go back and watch Rise of Skywalker again and go, and now I get this character's motivation, and that little scene has got so much more weight behind it, in the same way that we've just seen Kenobi, and all the interchanges and exchanges that happened in that make me want to go back and watch A New Hope again for the 100 and God knows what time, and know that I'll be watching certain sequences with like, now I get where that character's coming from. With Star Wars novels and comics, especially in the last sort of 8 years, the canon era, it really does have an effect on stuff that you've lived with for decades, literally in some cases.
Yeah.
So it's very clever.
Well, it's like, whilst I was cutting my toenails, can you believe it?
Ooh, I did my fingernails earlier. How strange.
Well, there's a weird entry into the making tracks. Yeah.
Grooming habits.
Exactly. So whilst I was deep in 4, I was thinking, well, actually, you know, we were so fixated with the Kenobi series lining up with A New Hope. And then we get that line in part 6 of Kenobi where Anakin or Darth Vader says, you didn't make me this way, Darth Vader did. And you kind of go, well, that totally now lines up with what he says in Return of the Jedi. That is the kind of stuff that I really, really enjoy about Star Wars at the moment. They're not only helping fill in the blanks, they're helping give new depth and meaning to what was said in the original trilogy without it feeling too shoehorned. Whatever Obi-Wan said to Luke at the time, without this context, comes across as being a bit of a reach. But now it makes perfect sense.
I always remember reading this on Ain't It Cool, Harry Knowles' site back in the day when Attack of the Clones came out. And Dooku, we've talked about this on Making Tracks recently, when Dooku does that speech and all the things that he says to Kenobi when he's held up in the energy binders. You know, he's giving him everything that he needs, but he can't believe it because it's too terrible to contemplate. But Dooku tells him the truth. And then you look at Ben in the hut years later in A New Hope speaking to Luke, and you're going, that's a bit of BS, isn't it? Betrayed and murdered by a young Jedi called Darth Vader. And now, even though you know, and we all know, that Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader, you also know that's too early for Luke to know that. It would literally melt his mind after what's happened to him already and what's ahead with Beru. And of course, it puts a whole new shade on that as well, doesn't it? It makes you think how much of a fight they probably put up when they turned up at the homestead, as opposed to before you kind of think they just passively died. The hell they did. They got the guns out. They made a stand. You know, it was a proper fight. It adds so much complexity to that sequence when you realise Ben is imparting to Luke what Anakin said to him, almost by way of taking the burden off him, saying it wasn't your fault. I did this to me. It's very, very clever. I really would love to know what Lucas thinks of that specific exchange, because it's so ingrained and so clever, because we've inferred things into that speech for 40 plus years.
Damn clever. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't help us with the news. What are we going to start talking about today? What's on the news menu?
On the news menu today is that Fantha Tracks are going to be part of the Star Wars Zone at London Film and Comic Con from the 8th to the 10th of July next month. We're thrilled to be a part of the Zone again. We were there in 2018 and 2019. Got loads of content, met loads of faces, loads of fun. Darth Elvis is performing. Generation Skywalker are there. Jez Allinson, the running Stormtroopers, there. The Rebel Legion, you guys are going to be there. There's all sorts of folks involved and going to be floating around. Our friends at Star Wars Sessions will be there. We're going to do a live Making Tracks on the stage on the Saturday. Other stuff to be announced. We're trying to figure out little logistical bits and bobs here and there. More news coming to Fantha Tracks, but the bottom line is we've got a big fun weekend coming up down in London playing Star Wars with all our friends.
I can't wait. It's going to be fun. It is literally going to be like a mini celebration. Rebel Legion's going to be there. Mando Mercs are going to be there. UK Garrison 501st are going to be there. You guys are going to be there. Generation Skywalker. It's going to be really fun. And I think I might even have managed to squeeze myself onto the cosplay stage to do a Rebel Legion panel as well. So yes, we'll see how that all comes together. Over 3 days, plenty of chance and to come down and see us and get photos and meet the Fantha team and everybody else and rock out to Darth Elvis. So I can't wait.
Hi, this is Guy Henry and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Enjoy.
So the question that we posed on Fantha Tracks website earlier this week is John Williams, aka known as the Maestro to most of us, nearing the end of his cinematic journey? John sits down and has a chat with the Associated Press and basically talks about working on all manners of soundtracks. And one quote which came out from that conversation is that he says, "At the moment, I'm working on Indiana Jones 5, which Harrison Ford, who's quite a bit younger than I am, I think has announced it will be his last film. So I thought if Harrison can do it, then perhaps I can also," which obviously is fantastic for us because what would be an Indiana Jones film without a John Williams score? From what we understand, Ford hasn't actually gone on record to say that Indy 5 is his last film. John kind of says that a Star Wars film demands 6 months worth of work, which at his point is a big commitment to him. You can kind of see that he's winding down quite a bit, but do you think that we're still going to see some more John Williams music for A Galaxy Far, Far Away anytime soon?
Like you say, he's 90, and if a score takes 6 months, you think when you're a kid, the 6 weeks holiday feels like forever, but the older you get, a year is a less of a percentage of your life than it was when you're a kid. So a year when you're a kid is a long time. A year when you're an adult, the years just whistle by. It's less of a chunk of your life. So I think that's why time feels like it's going faster. I can only imagine what it feels like for John Williams, who's 90, to think if you're practical and logical about life, to get to 90 is a great knock. But when you're 90, 6 months is a big chunk of what you've got left. He did the theme for Solo a few years ago, which was great. And then John Powell went and just expanded on that and made one of the great Star Wars soundtracks. And he's done it again with Natalie Holt for Kenobi, working there to give the theme for Kenobi. I don't believe he's done anything for Andor because he didn't work on Rogue One. That was Giacchino, as you mentioned. So I don't suppose he's involved in that. And maybe when Mothma turns up in that, they'll strip out some of the thematic music from Jedi, perhaps, to give her some sort of theme. So maybe that's how they'll go with that. Well, we don't know what else is down the road. Taika's film's the next film, so why would Williams have any involvement in that specifically? So I think maybe he might be done with Star Wars unless there's more Galaxy's Edge music to come. But if he does any more Star Wars, I think it'll be like single pieces. But if the film's as good as we hope, Frank Marshall seems buzzing about it. James Mangold seems to be buzzing about it. The film should be in cinemas right now, but they put it back 12 months. So you'd like to think they're finessing and focusing on things and making it the mega awesome film we hope it's going to be to see out the series. He's doing an Indiana Jones score, so wow. And that's his sign-off for big screen stuff. And he goes and does the Yo-Yo Ma music that he's been doing and all the other stuff that he's done with other musical endeavours. How can you complain at any of that?
Star Wars, I think, because the more shows that we get, the more films that we're going to get, will offer other composers the opportunity to put their own stamp on the Star Wars musical landscape. You listen to Natalie Holt's score for Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's got John Williams written all over it. There's bits where she's taken fairly direct literal lifts, and then there's other bits where she's done different versions. Irrespective if he does come back to Star Wars or not, the contribution that John Williams has given us for Star Wars alone, is astounding when you think about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot in those scores that can still be mined to offer composers at least a jumping off point. If there's a original trilogy character, or maybe a prequel trilogy character that suddenly finds themselves with their own Disney Plus streaming series, then maybe he might come back. You never know. He might do a score for Lando.
Yeah, there's music in Empire that you could take the bones of and work something up off. And like you say, he's 90, he's still productive. Crazily productive. And he's so modest. You read into the article and he's very much like, I'm like anyone. I think, I wish I'd done that better. I wish I'd done that better. And he's sort of saying, I'm no Beethoven. Yeah, you are, John. So anything that we get is fantastic. The music from those 9 movies and other ancillary stuff that he's done in and around it is such a template, like Macquarie's style is a template, and you would be well served not to steer too far away because that is one of the pillars of Star Wars they still adhere to now. So there's lots of little things in different areas of Star Wars that you can call back to, that it ain't broke, so don't fix it. Ludwig did what he did and it worked perfectly for Mando. And I can't imagine that now without that music. Same with Book of Boba Fett. That was a nice riff on the Mando music, and that worked really well. But then you see Kenobi, and it's like, that Mando music wouldn't work in Kenobi. No. Natalie Holt did a brilliant job. I can't wait to have a good listen to that score.
And I really hope that they give her something else to work on, be it the Taika film or another series, maybe Ahsoka or something like that. Although I think maybe Ahsoka, because it overlaps with Mando, might end up being Ludwig again. But we'll see.
On the point of Ahsoka, you could very well be right. Ludwig doing that makes sense because we've got Ahsoka in this modern era. I wonder I wonder whether Kevin Kiner could get involved. Kiner was the first person to write any music for Ahsoka back in the Clone Wars, so I just wonder whether there could be some involvement there.
That's a really good shout. That makes sense. I mean, I'm guessing Kevin's going to be back doing Bad Batch Season 2. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear Kevin's work involved on the live action than necessarily the animated, even though it makes no real difference. But I just think that it'll be interesting just to see and hear what he could do maybe for like a feature film as well for Star Wars. I think he understands the John Williams motifs and also how and when to use those motifs. A bit like at the end of Part 6 of Kenobi, we finally get that big Imperial Darth Vader Imperial March, which I know that you're not a huge fan about when it's used before Empire Strikes Back. So I'd be well up to hear what Kevin could do for Andor or any other series.
Hello, I'm Dennis Lawson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
We return to Blackburn back in May of this year for Star Wars Fan Fun Day 2022. We had the good fortune to speak to a bunch of really great people, and amongst those great people was Dermot Crowley, who of course was General Madine in Return of the Jedi. So this is a brief catch-up with Dermot Crowley from Return of the Jedi.
So we're here at Star Wars Fan Fun Day, and I'm here with Dermot Crowley. How has your day been? Have you enjoyed it? How are you?
It's been terrific. It's been absolutely wonderful. I can't remember being at a Star Wars convention in a very long time that had such a friendly atmosphere. It's very family orientated. It's full of real Star Wars fans, and I've had such a laugh with a lot of people. It's been great. Yeah, I can't wait to come back, and I hope they ask me again.
I'm sure they will. You've been in and around Star Wars, obviously, for a long time, and done different events. This feels like such a unique event in that people can get in close and have a proper chat with you.
It's completely unique in that, well, first of all, it's for a really good cause. And that's a wonderful thing in itself. But I mean, everybody who's here, they're not here to just wander around. They want to know about the movies. They want to meet you and find out what it was like working on it. And it's a big thrill. Yeah.
And having been around it for a while, you know, there's fans like myself who've been around since I was a little kid. And you'll have told your stories to me 1,000 times, let's say, or folks like me. But when you meet a youngster who you know doesn't know your story, does that still charm you, telling them?
It's brilliant. Because, I mean, when I got the part in Return of the Jedi, which is at least 40 years ago, I had no idea I would be talking to somebody like you 40 years later. And as a result, it's going down through the generations. And that's amazing. Yeah. You know?
It's a treat. And you still, like you say, you still enjoy doing this sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And how's life for you? How's work going? How's life in general?
Very busy. Life is good, I'm glad to say. I do a series called Luther for the BBC, which I've been doing for the last 10 years, and we've just finished the feature film, which will get a cinema release next year and also be on Netflix. So, yeah.
It's all good stuff. Brilliant. Well, thanks for your time.
For a series that was absolutely jam-packed with wonderful treats for Star Wars fans, attentive, casual, and everything in between, one of the real gems was right at the end of the show as you're about to enter Beggar's Canyon, and all of a sudden, the Force ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn appears, and Liam Neeson is back in the role that he created back in 1997 when he filmed it, 1999 when it came out, of Qui-Gon Jinn. And I'm going to throw it straight to you because he was very clear that he didn't want anybody else playing that role, and it was his way of showing some respect for what George had done. How did you feel when Qui-Gon Jinn appeared in front of Obi-Wan?
A little bit disappointed, actually, if I'm honest. I just felt like the performance was, I don't know, it just felt really kind of phoned in. That being like the last thing we see is really cool, but I kind of almost wish that he had come to Ben slightly earlier. Felt like everything was kind of being wrapped up very quickly. When Vader's kind of pummeled him and he's got all those, he's holding the rocks up with the Force, just to maybe hear a hint of Qui-Gon's voice, just ever so, subtly. But the way it was kind of executed, I just didn't think it was particularly well done. It didn't necessarily resonate for me. I really like how he's kind of like, he wouldn't want anybody else to play it. And to be honest, I wouldn't want anybody else to be Liam Neeson because I don't think there's any need for that character to be recast unless they decided they felt they needed to do like a young Qui-Gon series on Disney Plus or something like that. I was just wasn't taken with how it was done.
I did like it, mainly because Qui-Gon, when Ben's sort of looking at him with that smile on his face, basically says, I was here all along, but you weren't ready to see me, which I thought spoke to the whole of what we've just seen.
That makes
and
sense.
Ben has had to kind of claw his way back to being Obi-Wan again, as opposed to just being old Ben. That spoke to the journey to me. Qui-Gon was my favourite character in Phantom Menace, so I got a buzz out of seeing it. And also the fact that you've had The Mandalorian, where they obviously had to de-age Hamill to be a Luke of that era, and then did more in Book of Boba Fett. You saw the sort of Attack of the Clones era sequence when they didn't de-age either Hayden or Ewan, and then you see Palpatine hologram turn up where he looks just like he does in Rise of Skywalker, which still strikes me as very odd. And now you see Neeson, and they've clearly not de-aged him either, but Liam Neeson pretty much looks exactly like he did in Phantom Menace. Not aged, has he?
Nah, not really. The wig looked a bit wonky. I don't know. It's clearly an afternoon's work. That aside, just having that moment, and now that we know it, and the actual shot itself was quite nice. I really liked seeing them both walk off into the sunset. I liked what he said about, I've been here all along, because ultimately he has. I'm sure he's probably seen all of Ben's trials and tribulations since he's passed over. But I don't know. It just felt like it just lacked a little bit of gravitas to it, and just it was a little bit too casual.
Something that Qui-Gon says makes me wonder about how Force ghosts work. Clearly, like you say, he's been right on the edge of Ben's perception, if you want to call it that, all that time. So Qui-Gon has seen all of this, quite apart from the fact that they say this is a one season and out. Clearly, that tells you it's not. You wouldn't just leave that hanging for a 2-part Marvel comic series or a novel in a year's time. That's too big a moment to just leave hanging. So clearly, that's a little backdoor to, we could do more, and this is one of the things you might see. But the thought that Qui-Gon says, I was here all along, but you weren't ready to see me, it's not just the Force ghost that will suddenly haunt your starship cockpit when you're not expecting it. You've got to be perceptive to seeing it. And that, to me, said that a Force ghost can't just come to you. Luke, he's calling out for Ben on Hoth when he's lost in the snow, and Ben appears because Luke's calling out for him. And that tells me that Luke is receptive to seeing Ben. He wasn't receptive to seeing Ben, even though, from a practical point of view, we knew that the Force ghost concept probably didn't exist when they made the original film. But nevertheless, Luke wasn't ready for that then. He was ready in Empire. He was clearly ready to see his father and Yoda and Ben at the end of Jedi when it feels like it's all done. So it just makes me wonder whether or not it's not just about the Force ghosts appearing like, I'm here to impart my wisdom to you, young Rey, or whatever. It's that Rey was ready to see Luke.
Oh, yeah. As Luke gets stronger in the Force, Obi-Wan apparition becomes clearer, which is why it's a voice in A New Hope, and it's why at the beginning of Empire it's a bit hazy and it's a bit kind of blurry and it's in and out, and it's his voice is very echoey. But then he goes to see Dagobah and he spends time with Yoda and he starts to train and having become stronger with the Force. Then suddenly he's having conversations with Yoda and Ben. It gets to a point whereby in Return of the Jedi he's having a full-on conversation with Ben Kenobi, and he's sitting down on a log and the reeds and all the bushes around him are moving as he's passing through. I still quite like that very idea that Timothy Zahn had, going right the way back to Heir to the Empire, whereby there is a distance and Luke and Ben have to part ways because Ben is finding it harder to kind of stay present in that kind of universe. So I quite like that there's a definitive ending to how long a Force ghost can last. I wouldn't necessarily want like Rey to have communication with Yaddle or something like that.
Yeah, like a Jedi Council of Force Ghosts sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I don't necessarily think that works. And I think maybe there's got to be a personal connection with them as well, rather than necessarily random Force Ghosts from eons ago. Like Rey having a conversation with Avar Kriss or something random like that, for example. But, if there's a personal connection, it's that whole, the other world of pulling them and but to some degree having to kind of fight it to stay present.
If you're a Force user and you've used midichlorians to make something happen in the Force with somebody else, it's almost like you're sharing the same drink, isn't it? So there's that connection.
Precisely, you've got that connection, and I think that bond is what is going to keep them accessible to Ben Kenobi in this example going forward. So I think it would be quite fun, actually, to have a appraisal from Qui-Gon, and this would be quite fun. You imagine like a 5-part series for Marvel Comics where it's Qui-Gon Jinn giving a whole appraisal over Obi-Wan's kind of career up to that point. So why did you do that? When you went to Geonosis, what were you thinking? So you get that different perspective and maybe get his insights into maybe where Ben could have changed, which will then inform the older Ben that we see in A New Hope.
Ewan has come out and has said it before and says it again. I really hope we do another. If we could do another one of these every now and again, I'd be happy about it. So he's clearly up for doing more. Kathy Kennedy says if the engagement on Disney Plus is enough and the fan reaction is positive enough, And it has been fairly mixed, much to my surprise, but I think more positive than negative. I think that would point to them wanting to do another one. And Ewan says every now and again. So you probably can leave it you can leave it 2 or 3 years and do other stuff and come back to it. If they did that, now Qui-Gon coming back gives you options, doesn't it? Because like you say, they parted as master and apprentice. One of the most sorrowful moments of Ben's life was losing Qui-Gon, but he had to turn and pivot quickly because he had then had to become the master for Anakin. And he says it, I've been here all along, you weren't ready to see me. Well, how long after Phantom Menace is this? This is 20 years after Phantom Menace. He's kind of been almost there for 20 years. Yoda was ready to see him because Yoda says, lessons you're going to learn in your isolation on Tatooine. It's took 10 years for Ben to get ready to receive that knowledge directly from his former master. So there's lots of little elements that you could play forward into a future series. Qui-Gon's got all that knowledge that he got from Dooku, and there's that whole lineage of master and apprentice going back. But to hear Qui-Gon's thoughts on why did you make that decision? Why did you do that when Reva turned up? And to look at the scenario, because now we know he was 12 inches to the left of camera or just to the right of camera for everything we've seen in Obi-Wan Kenobi.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Hot dang, we've got a listener's question, and this listener's question has come from the man himself, Darth Elvis, and he asks, 2023 is the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi, and Celebration is returning to London. What panel would you most like to see, and what ROTJ guests would you like to see attending? Over to you, Newbold.
Ooh, well, 2 people I'd love to see. I think Hamill feels like he's got to be there because he wasn't at Anaheim because he was up filming a show up in Canada, I believe. So feels like he needs to be there, and he was at the original Celebration in 2007, and so he's a perennial for Celebration Europe. So it'd be great to have him there to hear his opinion, not only on Jedi 40th, but obviously on what he did in Mando and Book of Boba Fett. So that'll be, and whatever else he might have done since. That'll be fantastic. So definitely would love to see Hamill. It's unlikely, but not unrealistic to think that maybe with only 2 months to go until that final Indiana Jones film comes out, and they did the Lucasfilm panel. So it wasn't all Star Wars at this celebration. You had a bit of Willow and you had a bit of Indy. Maybe Harrison Ford would come out and give us a bit of perspective on all those quotes that everybody said for the last 40 years of, oh, well, he wanted to get killed off because he didn't want to do it anymore. And then he comes back in Force Awakens and clearly has a blast. That would be interesting to get. Put my hand up, I'll do it. Somebody interview him on stage and sort of say, well, what was the real thing behind that? Because clearly there was no bad blood between him and Lucasfilm, and no. Solo was the character that made him a household name, and obviously Indy's his signature character, but nevertheless, you know what I mean? I'd love to dig into that. Whilst we're on the subject of actors from the film, obviously Anthony Daniels makes all the sense. I really would like a focus, like they did with Attack of the Clones this time, and they've done it with other celebrations focusing on specific films. I'd love the focus to be heavily on Jedi for this show, because we do have another question. It's from Alan Wills, who has sent in questions before. What do you think the main focus at Celebration Europe in 2023 will be? With many of the streaming series already come and gone by then, perhaps Ahsoka will debut, or the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron film, or maybe even the second series of Andor, since that's filming in the UK. Yes, it is. So that's a spin on Elvis says, we know it's Jedi 40th. What are the other focuses going to be? And will some of these actors who are from Return of the Jedi, we've just seen Ian McDiarmid in Kenobi. What's not to say we're not going to see him again in Andor? So those actors who've been doing the role for, 40 years by next year, they will have already filmed them this time 40 years ago, because it was mostly shot in 82. How many of those guys, like Anthony Daniels, we saw him very briefly in Kenobi, and McDiarmid for that one scene, how many of those guys are going to return for other projects? So there's lots of performers from Return of the Jedi, lots of Jabba's Palace guys, a lot of Ewok performers. Yeah. I'd love to see Warwick interviewed on stage specifically about Jedi. The beautiful one would have been if Carrie had still been here, because he interviewed Carrie. I would love to have Carrie to have interviewed Warwick about Jedi. That would have been the cutest thing in the world. I think there's lots of scope with Jedi to get some really interesting stories, because back in Essen in 2013, that was Jedi 30th. That was a fun, and they screened it in the park, and all the stuff that we had then, and that was a good fun event focusing on Jedi. But now we're 40 years past Jedi, so there needs to be a heavy focus on that, like we never quite got for Empire, because pandemic put paid to that. the other stuff, like Alan says, I think there's plenty of other shows they could focus on. What do you think?
That's the thing, isn't it? And I suppose we're going to find this as we move on down the timeline, as we get the 45th anniversary of A New Hope or the 40th anniversary of Empire, Matt, which might be a big thing because we did miss the 40th. But these films are unfortunately receding into the distance.
Yeah.
And you've got all this new fan base, and every time there's a new series, you're going to bring in and introduce new fans. So the Lucasfilm balancing act that they now have to do is probably really tricky, because you think you've got to try and balance that celebration of the older films, the films that created the thing that we love, but also, quite rightly, there will be Andor Season 2 next year. So therefore you go, well, let's hope for some kind of Andor panel, which we might, similar to what we got with Rogue One. You know, we had some Rogue One panels, and we had that Rogue One costume display. So it'd be nice, as Andor's being shot in the UK, that we get something similar, a bit like they had the Mandalorian experience at Anaheim this year.
Yeah.
It's trying to give, I guess, everything a little bit of love and a little bit of attention. The celebration for like Bad Batch and celebration for Clone Wars, the celebrating of things that have been, but also then looking forward to the things that are going to come. Next year, in April, there's rumours abound that it's the Taika project is the next one to go under the cameras. And if that's to start filming early 2023, well, then there's got to be a panel with Taika and maybe introducing the main cast. Maybe there's a sneak peek of a couple of shots, a bit like we got with the Ahsoka thing, that maybe will only be in the actual panel itself. But that's the kind of thing you think, well, kind of also where Celebration needs to do. They need to kind of be ramping up and starting the hype train for the next film and the next series. And especially now that we're no longer focusing on the Skywalker saga, every single time that you have a new film now, it's going to be like, we've got to start earlier because we need to introduce all these characters and get people on board earlier. You know, just because it's a Star Wars film doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to resonate with it straight away. You focus as much as you do on the old films as you do on the new stuff and the stuff that's coming around the corner. So fingers crossed, it'll be a bit of both. And hopefully that also then means that we get like a nice array of merch. But if I was going to have my wish list fulfilled for like a Return of a Jedi panel, I would like to see a nice 40th anniversary Return of a Jedi panel. Obviously, it'd be great to see George there. Whereas before we've had a John Williams performance at the end, I think it's time to get the band back together, and I think it's time to get Droopy and Sai, and they can do the original version of Laptee Neck that we saw in Return of a Jedi in 1983.
What a great shout. If they could get the puppeteers up to do that, get Tim Rose out there and get those guys out there. Get the old Jabba, well, not the old Jabba puppet, but get Jabba up there dancing to it. Just one thing that occurs to me is you're speaking about the modern stuff compared to the old stuff, because like you say, there's new fans coming in all the time. And ridiculously, in 2024, it will be the 10th anniversary of Star Wars Rebels. There's an anniversary. That's a big celebration. In 2025, it's 10 years since The Force Awakens. So you feel that if there's a celebration in 2025, that will be a huge celebration. So you're thinking wherever they hold that, I don't know where that would be, probably Orlando. I think it's probably due in Orlando. If they do that in 25, you've got to start thinking that's a big enough event that you'd like to think that Daisy and John and Oscar and those guys will be there, and that the focus will be on that, because, you know, you're 10 years past now, you're sort of on that cycle of there's negativity towards that trilogy, but you're getting to the point where, you know, the 10-year-old kids in 2015 are now adults. And so the reappraisal circle that happened to the prequels in a positive manner will start happening to those. Maybe that's the start of the turnaround there. Yeah, you're right. There's so much new stuff coming now. I mean, 2024 will be 5 years of The Mandalorian. Okay, it's only 5 years, but nevertheless, nostalgia is a huge part of Star Wars, isn't it? We can't just constantly keep thinking, well, in 2027, it's the 50th anniversary of Star Wars. Of course, they're going to celebrate that, but they also need to remember that there's a 10th or a 20th or 2028, you know, that's the 20th anniversary of the Clone Wars. You know, there's all these things that harken back.
The question is, actually, as with more content that comes out, is it going to be a worthwhile thing to keep on celebrating all these landmarks things, especially for, say, let's say, you know, 10 years of a Book of Boba Fett or 20 years of Rebels and stuff like that? I mean, obviously we don't know how pre-existing shows and films and stuff will end up linking in with new material as it gets released, but at what point does it become a bit too much of a nostalgia fest and a little bit too much of a looking back? Because ultimately we're going to get to a point where every year will be an anniversary of something.
Yeah,
I guess as some of these series kind of end up being 10 years down the line or 15 years or 20 years down the line, they might not necessarily get the love or the celebration they deserve. When's a 10-year anniversary of Resistance? But then I suppose it all depends upon the impact it will have on the future of the storytelling. ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, if we manage to get to 60, 75 or 100 years since A New Hope, that damn well needs to be celebrated. Okay, thank you very much, Darth Elvis and Alan, for those questions. Hopefully we won't have too much time to wait and speculate about Celebration, and hopefully we'll get some news soon from ReedPop and Lucasfilm as to what we might start to see next year in London. However, that is all the time we have for this week, but if you'd like to send in a listener's question, Mark, can you let people know how they can do it?
I certainly can. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You might need some cough medicine there, mate. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. So get your questions in like Darth Elvis did, like Alan did. Get your questions in, we will talk about anything and everything. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK time, 4 PM Eastern, 1 PM Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And check out Fantha Tracks radio episodes on Fridays, 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of the Fantha from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, and Cannon Fodder. And that's me done for this episode.
Excellent. And until next week's episode of Making Tracks, thank you very much for listening, everybody. Stay safe, take care, and of course, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Start Your Engines.
I better get a patch.